Good afternoon and welcome to Creating Safe Spaces, Navigating the Language of Antisemitism and Hate, the 2022 Holocaust Education Month workshop for educators presented by the Center of Holocaust Education and Scholarship. My name is Mina Cohn and I am the chair of the center, which is based here in Ottawa. It is indeed gratifying to have such a large turnout for this workshop. But before we start, a few housekeeping messages. For optimum viewing of the presentation, you may want to close any browser windows other than Zoom. We strongly suggest watching the session from a single device, ensuring a strong internet connection at your location. If you are having technical issues, you can private message tech support in the chat. And now I want to extend a warm welcome to all the teachers and administrators who have joined us this afternoon. CHES is a premier hub for Holocaust education in Ottawa with programs that focus on remembrance, combating anti-Semitism, outreach to schools, and community engagement. The annual Holocaust Education Month events held every November showcase our endeavors. Sadly, anti-Semitism and hatred did not end with the Holocaust. Particularly alarming is the current rise of anti-Semitism in schools across Canada and now being circulated and echoed through social media. Given the subsequent growth in anti-Semitism that demonizes both Israel and the Jewish students, CHES had to search for an answer. And for us, one answer is educate against hate through programs such as this evening's workshop. Holocaust education sensitizes us to important lessons and challenges us to think critically, not only about the Holocaust, but about the world and the role we play in it. CHES commends the Minister of Education, Stefan Lecce, on his decision to implement Holocaust education for grade 6 students starting in 2023 across Ontario. This is a great step forward for all our students. And now I'm pleased to welcome Avi Posen, Senior Director of Israel Education and at Unpacked for Educators, a division of Open Door Media, to lead us through the workshop. Avi's focus is on content creation and working with educators around the world to help them effectively lead difficult conversation on complicated subject. Avi, please.
Mina, thank you so much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. And we're all here today for a very, very important conversation, a very important session, but ultimately we're here with one goal in mind, and that is to create safe spaces for our students. Our main priority as educators is always to keep our students safe, and this means all of our students. Today, our focus is on our Jewish students and the anti-Semitism or Jew hatred that they are too often experiencing in the classroom, outside of the classroom, and on social media. I want to start off by thanking the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship for being such great leaders in the Ottawa community and taking the initiative to bring this vitally important conversation to Ottawa and other Ontario educators. So thank you so much to CHES. So what is our plan for today? We're going to spend the next 90 minutes or so doing a number of things. Throughout the session, we'll hear from multiple stakeholders in this conversation. We'll hear live testimonials from an Ottawa student, a parent, an educator, as well as an administrator. We'll also speak about anti-Semitism, how to identify it, whose fault it is, how we can respond to it, and how do we respond to it when we do identify it. We'll also have the opportunity to go into breakout rooms, to reflect on what we've heard, share experiences, and share ideas with our colleagues right here. All right, so let's get into it. First of all, who am I? I'm Avi Posen. As Mina mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Israel Education at Unpacked for Educators, a division of Open Door Media. We're a Jewish educational media company that produces YouTube videos, full-length feature films, podcasts, articles, and social media content about a variety of topics, including anti-Semitism, the Jewish people, Israel, as well as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We make a concerted effort with all of our content to focus on nuance, complexity, and empathy. In the past, I've worked as a high school educator at the Gray Academy of Jewish Education in Winnipeg. I worked with Jewish university students and worked as a camp director. I currently live in Haifa in northern Israel with my wife, daughter, and dog, and I'm honored to be able to spend the next little while with all of you today. Those of you who are joining us live and those of you who will be watching the recording later on. So one important point that I'd like to get across before we jump in is this. If you have questions throughout the next 90 minutes, this is how you can send them in. The tech is about to give the instructions in the chat as well. You will need to go to menti.com. Again, these instructions will be in the chat the entire time as well, using the code 86966769, and you will have the opportunity to send in questions throughout the duration of this webinar. And the reason we're doing it in that way is, often people, even on Zoom, sometimes are shy to ask questions that they really want to ask. So we wanted everybody really to feel comfortable to go ahead and ask those questions, ask those burning questions, because that's what today is all about. So with that, I'd like to get started today by introducing our first testimonial of the afternoon. Of course, we're going to start with a student testimonial, because what's more important than hearing from our students themselves? That's why we're all here in the first place. So Dina Friedman is a grade 12 student in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board, and will speak to her experience as a Jewish student. She's the president of her school's Jewish Student Union and has been since grade 10. She's been in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board for all of high school. She's been interviewed on the CJN Daily with Elin Bessner, and the episode of the podcast is titled Ottawa's Jewish Community Has a Message for Their School Board, Nothing About Us Without Us. So Dina, thank you so much for being here, and I pass over the Zoom microphone to you.
Thank you for having me. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces, familiar names. Thank you all for being here. My name is Dina Friedman. I'm a grade 12 student in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. My father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, and I am Jewish. As some of you may know, I spoke at an event called Rise Up Ottawa not too long ago. My speech, as well as a few other students, can be found online. I urge you to go and listen to what your students are saying. After speaking, I was approached by several people, including politicians, who didn't know what was going on in our schools. So please understand that the Jewish students sitting in your classrooms and walking your halls are afraid. And we have been for years. All we want to do is to be able to succeed in school, but it's so hard when we are constantly feeling anxious and uneasy. As I walk to school every morning, I quickly tuck my Mug and David necklace into my purple and gold NHS hoodie because I'm afraid. As I talk with a student whose parents insist they not ever mention their Jewish identity at school, I am afraid. As I see a swastika carved in the chair in the auditorium, I'm afraid. As I listen to teachers show biased and inaccurate videos that spread hate and misinformation about Israel, I'm afraid. As I walk down the hallway and see a student shoving a Jewish peer into the lockers yelling, "Effing Jew," I'm afraid. When I hear the intercom turn on over your voice, announcing we're in a secure school, and I am brought back to my Jewish elementary school days, I'm afraid. As my teachers single out a Jewish student in front of the whole class, expecting them to explain what Yom Kippur is and their previous trip to Israel with zero regard for their safety, they are afraid. You have let the student 2 seats behind them, who posted on Instagram that she believes all Israelis are Nazis, know that they are Jewish. You have now put a target on their back. How can you publicize our Jewishness with no intention of keeping us safe? I have taken upon myself the task of educating others about anti-Semitism. I am more than happy to explain Jewish holidays and customs. However, you must understand that this is a decision I have made. Do not expect all Jews to do the same. It is not Jewish students' responsibility to educate our educators. It is your responsibility to educate yourselves and keep Jewish students safe. During class discussions and debates, we hear how quickly our peers turn to anti-Semitism and mask it with the term anti-Zionism. We are terrified. I was taught to listen when people tell me who they are. My peers have told me who they are, so I turn to you. We turn to the people who are supposed to keep us safe. And your silence is so loud. When you do and say nothing to protect your Jewish students, you are telling us, you're on your own, Jew. Good luck. And so your Jewish students continue to be afraid. We continue to suffer in silence, learning to stay quiet. In order to keep your Jewish students safe and empowered, please familiarize yourself with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, also known as IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism, so you can spot it in your classrooms and stop it in its tracks. Understand that criticizing Israel responsibly means steering clear of anti-Semitic tropes and language. It means not demonizing the entire population of a country and an entire ethno-religion. It means critiquing specific policies and actions and using specific language rather than broad statements or inflammatory and accurate language like apartheid state, colonization, and ethnic cleansing. It means not whitewashing or delegitimizing Jewish identity and ancestral connection to the land. It means steering clear of double standards and not calling for the annihilation of an entire people. Most importantly, it is understanding that the Jewish people are indigenous to the land of Israel. Denying that is anti-Semitism. If you recall, I opened by telling you who I was, by telling you that my father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, and that I am Jewish. I didn't choose those words at random. They are words that should echo through time as an example of where anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic hate invariably lead. In January 2002, American Jewish journalist Daniel Pearl was kidnapped while on assignment in Pakistan. He was tortured by his captorers. And then finally, 1 month later, he was forced to read a confession on video, culminating with the following phrase, "My father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, I am Jewish." We all know how that video ends, with Daniel's graphic execution. Daniel Pearl's perpetrated confession was also a proud expression of who he was, and a stark reminder that none of this is about social justice or anti-colonialism or anti-racism. It's not even really about Israel. It is Jew hatred, plain and simple. The oldest and most enduring hatred this world has ever known. And when not confronted and stopped in its tracks, it is a hatred that knows no bounds. But students can't fight this hate alone. We're tired. No one is listening to the warning signs. Use your voice, your influence, and your authority to end Jewish hatred. Keep us safe. We're begging you. I'm a 17-year-old grade 12 student in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. My father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, and I am proud to be Jewish.
Dina, thank you so much for your powerful words. You have a lot of courage coming and speaking to anybody about this experience, but really thank you for your leadership and courage in sharing. And it's very upsetting to hear the experience that you've had and so many Jewish students have had, not only in Canada, but around the world as anti-Semitism continues to rise. Especially what really hurt me was when you mentioned that you put your Star of David necklace, you hide it on your way to school, that you feel that you need to hide your identity in Canada in 2022. To me, that is shocking, upsetting, all the words one could imagine. And that's the reason we're here, to try to make you and fellow students feel safe and create an inclusive environment for all of our students. And today our focus, of course, is on Jewish students. So Dina, thank you again so much for sharing your words. With that, I'm going to pass it over to our next testimonial. We're going to hear from a parent. Dr. Yoni Friedhoff is the father of 3 Jewish OCDSB students, and he's going to share his experience as a parent. Dr. Friedhoff, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Avi. Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you today. Over the course of the past 9 years, I've had 3 children attend OCDSB schools. Not a year has gone by without their experiencing regular anti-Semitism. Not a year has gone by that at least some of their experiences haven't been ignored, minimized, or gaslit. While at times the anti-Semitism has come directly from their teachers, mainly it's simply tolerated by them. And we don't blame them, as the systemic anti-Semitism within the OCDSB has actively made it challenging for teachers to receive the training required to recognize and manage an ancient hate, which has again morphed to adopt a times-appropriate conspiracy thinking to fuel it. If anti-Semitism at the OCDSB wasn't systemic, changes would already have occurred, and stories about Nazi salutes, swastikas, racist slurs, refusing to accommodate Jewish students on holidays, teachers relying on Jewish teenagers to serve as anti-Semitism envoys and educators would not be occurring weekly. If it weren't systemic, my oldest child would not have been cut off by the board chair with a few moments left of her testimony to the board about the anti-Semitism she'd experienced in its schools. If it weren't systemic, Erwin Kotler wouldn't have been disinvited from presenting. If it weren't systemic, my middle child wouldn't have been told last month by the board chair that the OCDSB is only on the start of its journey to understand and deal with anti-Semitism. A few weeks ago, as you've heard, there was an event organized by Lisa Levitin called Rise Up Ottawa. 5 students and former students bravely spoke of their anti-Semitism experiences within the OCDSB. 2 of those students were my children. More heartbreaking than the stories of the literal anti-Semitic episodes they recounted was the fact that all 5 spoke to the impact the anti-Semitism permitted and left largely unchecked by the OCDSB had on them socially, and where their ostracism was consequent almost entirely to anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. My children are no exception, whereby they have been verbally attacked and socially excluded, both in person and online, in response to their not joining in on the hyperbolic demonization of the world's only Jewish state, a country located 9,000 kilometers away from their school. The OCDSB's systemic anti-Semitism explicitly includes the erasure of Jewish experiences of anti-Semitism that occur in the context of anti-Israel hate, as well as in the reduction of discussion of anti-Semitism to only that which can be classified under white supremacist hate. Anti-Semitism today occurs in both contexts. No reasonable person thinks it is anti-Semitic for someone to object to specific Israeli policies that affect the Palestinian people. But in repeating this lie that objections aren't permitted, some teachers and some board members legitimize another lie, an anti-Semitic one, that Jews accuse people of anti-Semitism in bad faith in order to silence them. The campaign from within the OCDSB against the adoption of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, a definition which does nothing to curtail criticism of Israeli government policy, but which would rightly identify the demonization, double standardizing, and delegitimizing of the world's only Jewish state as anti-Semitic, upholds one of the most common manifestations of modern anti-Semitism. My children have faced extreme anti-Zionist anti-Semitism on social media, but also in their classrooms, being called racists, seeing the purposeful erasure of Israel on maps, being faced with chants about Israel's complete annihilation on school grounds, and seeing and hearing the Jewish people's greatest tragedy, the Holocaust, nefariously inverted with the accusation that the Jews are the new Nazis. As mentioned, IRA's adoption would do nothing to detract from seeking and advocating for a peaceful 2-state solution to a geopolitical conflict 9,000 kilometers away. However, not adopting it and by actively campaigning against it, the OCDSB is loudly informing its Jewish students and their parents that it doesn't care about them, that it prioritizes personal opinions about a foreign geopolitical conflict over the well-being and safety of the Jewish children in their care. The IRA definition is supported by the overwhelming majority of the Jewish community. And trotting out rare Jews who oppose it, I'll remind you that even with Jews, tokenism is racism. By not adopting the IRA definition, the OCDSB is condemning our children to continue to face types of anti-Semitism that you aren't sure how to identify, understand, or handle. By not adopting it, and then simply monitoring and evaluating the concerns and cases it raised, and instead claiming Jews will weaponize it to stifle legitimate criticisms of Israel, that's textbook anti-Semitism, as it's suggesting we have self-serving, villainous conspiratorial aims in wanting to protect our children and not see the Jewish state used to demonize them. Hopefully, sessions like today's will help, but I fear that so long as anti-Semitism is systemically upheld by the OCDSB's board, nothing will formatively change. Thanks for listening.
Dr. Friedhoff, thank you so much for your powerful and passionate words. I think many of us on this call, I'm sure, are parents, and hearing those words hit home, and shows how serious and real this problem is, right? Explaining all 3 of your kids and their experiences and how widespread this is. So thank you so much for sharing your words. And Yoni did a great job of touching on a number of topics that we're going to unpack over the next several minutes. And what I'd like to do right now is begin by speaking about what's going on. What is going on in Canada, right? If any of you have been following the news at all over the last few weeks, you would see an avalanche of stories relating to anti-Semitism, right? Kanye West tweeting that he'd go DEFCON on Jewish people, and then following up with interview after interview with dangerous conspiracy theories about the Jewish people. Then Kyrie Irving, the NBA star, who made headlines when he shared a link to an anti-Semitic film online. This past Saturday night, debate erupted following Dave Chappelle's opening monologue on SNL, which also dug into these topics. But those are all American examples, and we're Canadians. So what's going on in Canada? Let's look at a couple headlines, all from the past few months. Okay, let's read through some of these together. Right, Canadian Jews under attack. Close to 50% rise in hate crimes towards Jews in 2021. 2021 was the most anti-Semitic year in the last decade, anti-Semitism report. Canada's Jews say anti-Semites declared open season on them since the Gaza conflict. Jewish communities on edge amid troubling rise of anti-Semitism in Canada. The dangerous rise in anti-Semitism in Canada that nobody's talking about. And Canadian students give Nazi salute to Jewish teacher whose parents survived the Holocaust. These are all headlines from either Canadian newspapers or international headlines. And let's learn about some of the important facts about what's been going on when it comes to anti-Semitism in Canada as of late. So let's look at some numbers. Jews make up only 1% of the Canadian population, but make up 17% of police-reported hate crime, more than any other religious group in the country. Okay, here's an example from Canada's largest city. Right, hate crimes against Jews in Toronto rose by 32% last year, and Jews are the most targeted religious group. Right, during the last school year, on average, more than 2 anti-Semitic incidents per week were reported in Greater Toronto Area schools, many of them in middle schools. Now let's look at some examples from Ottawa, because that's where most of us are today, right? Here's an example right here of anti-Semitic graffiti that was shared with us that took place at Mowat Farm Park with a swastika painted on a play structure. Horrifying things to see, right? Another example in Ottawa, another swastika, this time outside the Metro at Greenbank Square. A few more numbers here. So Jews remain the most targeted religious group in Ottawa in 2021. So we're not just talking internationally, nationally, we're talking locally here. In 2021, Ottawa Police Service found that hate crime motivation against Jews increased by 60%. Police reported hate crimes targeting Jews were up 47%. And according to the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, Canadian Jews are statistically 10 times more likely to report being the target of a hate crime than any other Canadian religious minority. So what's going on here? And let's take a step back for a second and ask the question, what is anti-Semitism? Right? It's been mentioned a few times already today in the great testimonials, but let's define it. Okay, what is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So with that, we understand that anti-Semitism is Jew hatred. And there's a lot of ways in which this can manifest itself. I'd like to go through some of the examples that really make this clear, because it's important for us to be able to identify anti-Semitism when we see it, okay? So these are contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and in the religious sphere, taking into account the overall context, include but are not limited to the following examples. So let's run through these, and it's important to do so. Again, I remind you, if you have any questions as we're going through, go into menti.com, throw in your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible later on. So number one, calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. Number two, making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as a collective, such as, especially but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy, or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions, right? This example is one that we've seen over and over again over the last few weeks from celebrities and influencers with millions of followers. Number 3, accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, or even for acts committed by non-Jews. Number 4, denying the fact, scope, mechanisms, for example, gas chambers, or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of the Nazi Party and its supporters and accomplices during World War II, which we of course know as the Holocaust. A few more examples. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations, right? Accusations of dual loyalty, something that isn't new, has existed for thousands of years, but unfortunately, it's part of this disease that still, unfortunately, is metastasizing. Next, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor, right? That all groups, different ethnic groups, religious groups can have their country, but the Jewish people cannot. Applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, okay? Using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, right? Claims of Jews killing Jesus or the blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis, and holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the state of Israel. So it's very important, right? We always want to learn about the experiences, the shared experiences, the lived experiences of our students. And through these examples, we can really understand what is hateful, what is hurtful, what is so dramatically offensive to our students. With that, this is a very interesting question, I think, but it's a controversial question to even ask. But I want to show you a video surrounding this question. This is a video from Unpacked, the company that I work at, right? I mentioned at the beginning that we produce YouTube videos. This video is called "Whose Fault is Anti-Semitism?" So let's check it out.
Whose fault is anti-Semitism? This is probably the most controversial question about anti-Jewish prejudice. Conservatives blame liberals, liberals blame conservatives, Christians blame Muslims, Muslims blame Christians. So who's right? Is there a specific community that drives anti-Semitism? The answer is no. That's because anti-Semitism has always been spread by offenders across the ideological spectrum. What is the worldly religion of the Jew? Huckstering, declared the godfather of communism Karl Marx in 1843. What is his worldly god? Money. Not long after, Marx's contemporary Wilhelm Marr, the right-wing German nationalist who mainstreamed the term anti-Semitism, he was for it, declared that Jews didn't share the same sense of ethics as non-Jews because they preferred to accumulate wealth. Marx and Marr didn't agree on much, but they agreed on those self-serving, money-grubbing Jews. This anti-Semitic agreement didn't just hold among political rivals. For centuries, the Christian church persecuted Europe's Jews as Christ killers and infidels, while Voltaire, the Enlightenment's sharpest critic of the religious establishment, repeatedly assailed Judaism, calling Jews an ignorant, stupid people. These examples are just the tip of the anti-Semitic iceberg. Throughout history, people with entirely opposite worldviews, from Nazi Germany's Adolf Hitler to the Soviet Union's Joseph Stalin, have somehow found a way to agree on one thing: persecuting Jewish people. On the surface, this is pretty confusing, but it makes sense when you understand that anti-Semitism predates our modern categories and stems from something far more fundamental: the human inability to tolerate difference. Jews are the world's oldest minority that has refused to conform to the majority culture. For thousands of years, Jews have persisted in their unique practices and traditions. They were too stubbornly Jewish for religions like Christianity and Islam that sought to convert them, too religious for atheists and free thinkers like Voltaire, too closed off and clannish for the internationalist left like the communists of the Soviet Union who put Jews in gulags, and too worldly and widespread for the nationalist right who slurred them as corrupt cosmopolitans undermining the state. As an ever-present minority, Jews have been perpetually scapegoated for the majority's problems, constantly cast as untrustworthy and accused of serving their own interests at the expense of society's. In the biblical book of Esther, the villain Haman tells the king, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them." This 2,000-year-old expression of anti-Semitism could have been written yesterday. Take this recent broadcast by True News, a right-wing Christian news outlet that was accredited by the Trump White House.
That's the way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot, they lie, they do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda.
Now listen to this 2015 interview with Jewish Senator Bernie Sanders by Diane Rehm on NPR, the polar opposite of True News. You'll recognize some familiar themes.
Senator, you have dual citizenship with Israel.
Well, no, I do not have dual citizenship with Israel. I'm an American. I don't know where that question came from. No, I'm an American citizen, period.
Jews sought to escape their minority status by founding their own state, Israel. But now anti-Semites just accuse Jews everywhere, like Sanders, of disloyally working for Israel as part of a global conspiracy to control non-Jewish countries. These insinuations find their way from the internet into everyday interactions.
Mr. Cardin looks like a regular white guy, nice guy, whatever, but in actuality, he's a Jewish white guy. And if the public was informed of that by C-SPAN, I think they would take his comments differently. Because this guy is Jewish, that means that he is concerned about Israel.
Eric, I want to give the congressman a chance to respond to that.
I normally am pretty tolerant to people who ask questions, but I'm not to your assumption. I take great offense to that. This country, our loyalty is to America. Our concerns are to America.
As they have throughout history, conspiracy theories about Jews undermining society have deadly consequences. In 2018, a white supremacist named Robert Bowers, who claimed Jews were scheming to replace whites with brown immigrants, massacred 11 worshipers in a Pittsburgh synagogue. In the years that followed, another white nationalist attacked a synagogue in California, while black extremists with entirely different worldviews shot up a kosher supermarket in New Jersey and stabbed religious Jews at a Hanukkah gathering in New York. The point here is not that anti-Semitism exists equally in all these communities. It's that no community is immune to anti-Semitism because no community is immune to the instinct to stigmatize difference. Nowhere is this more apparent than Europe, where Jews surveyed from Spain to Sweden report experiencing serious anti-Semitism from all directions. This testimony reflects real-world bigotry. Whether it's Poland's Christian Conservative Party passing laws to repress studying the Holocaust and Polish complicity in it, or Hungary's nationalist leaders leading a state-sponsored campaign demonizing Jewish financier George Soros, blaming him for the country's problems and comparing him to Hitler, or Britain's preeminent left-wing party failing to stop pervasive anti-Semitism in its ranks under leader Jeremy Corbyn, or Jews in France being subjected to countless violent attacks at the hands of Islamic extremists. As you can see, anti-Semitism is the ultimate equal opportunity offender. So why does anti-Semitism continue to flourish across the spectrum? The answer is simple. People only tend to police anti-Jewish bigotry when it comes from the other side, not their own. It's understandable why this happens. After all, it's much easier to condemn the prejudice of people you already despise and disagree with. It's a lot harder to speak up when the bigotry is coming from your friends and allies. But think about it. Where do you have the power to make change? Among your friends or among your enemies? In your community or in someone else's? Yet too often, our national conversation about anti-Semitism consists of people trying to bounce anti-Semites from parties they weren't invited to. Conservatives policing progressive anti-Semitism, progressives policing conservative anti-Semitism, and so on. You don't have to be an expert in anti-Semitism to see why this doesn't work. So how can we stop this from happening and start fighting the anti-Semites instead of each other? The secret is this: focus on the anti-Semitic ideas expressed, not the individual expressing them. If we train ourselves to recognize anti-Jewish sentiments, rather than getting distracted by their source, we'll be much more successful at identifying and uprooting the hateful ideas across the board. But if we pick and choose which anti-Semitism to care about based on who says it, and give our own community a pass, the bigotry will continue to spread unchecked. Because the truth is, casting anti-Jewish prejudice as a specifically left-wing problem, or right-wing problem, or Christian problem, or Muslim problem, is really just a way of saying that it's someone else's problem. The only people who win this argument over who's the bigger bigot are the anti-Semites, who continue to spread their hate while their supposed opponents point fingers at each other. To truly combat anti-Semitism, we need to stop thinking of it as other people's problem and start confronting it as our problem.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, let's jump right back into it. As you can see, our focus here is not to blame any one group of people for anti-Semitism. Rather, to focus on the ideas behind anti-Semitism itself, right? We see anti-Semitism on the right, we see it on the left, we see it emanating from various ethnic and religious communities throughout Canada and the world. So as educators, it's on us to identify the anti-Semitic ideas, to understand how our Jewish students and the Jewish community feel when faced with it, to educate ourselves, to educate our students, and to do our best to make anti-Semitism and hate unacceptable within our schools and society, just as we do with any other form of racism. A few examples that have taken place in the Ontario community or even the Ottawa community that I'd like to touch on, right? Here's a screenshot here of a brand new, of a specific image, which is very clear, right? Students giving a Nazi salute, a Heil Hitler salute to their teacher. This is a real event that took place, right? You can imagine how Jewish students and teachers may react to this, right? I will speak for myself for a moment. I'll give my own anecdotal response to this, right? I, like many in the Jewish community of Ottawa and in Canada, I'm a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, right? I lost over 90 relatives, 90, who were murdered during the Nazi Holocaust. I grew up hearing the stories of my grandparents, and thank God I continue to hear their stories today. Stories of how their grandparents, their little siblings, all their cousins and aunts and uncles and friends were ripped away from them and murdered just for being Jewish. Right? The intergenerational trauma of the Holocaust is very real, and in many ways is still very, very fresh. As you know, this isn't an event we're learning about that happened 500 years ago. We know people today, our own family members, who went through this, and we hear these stories, and we have received, you know, the emotional distress that they experienced, and it gets to us deeply, right? So when somebody gives a Nazi salute, many Jews interpret this as a direct attack on their murdered family members, on the suffering that their family members who survived the Holocaust went through, on their own community, and injects a horrifying sense of fear that this hatred is still around. That is how many Jews are feeling when you see something like this, right? I would say probably every Jew, but I don't like to use the word every. Another example is when people deny or question the Holocaust, the most widely documented atrocity in human history, an event that was so meticulously documented by the perpetrators themselves, by many of the bystanders, and of course, the survivors too. As an educator, it's so important to educate yourself about the history of events like the Holocaust, so that if a student comes up to you or says in class the Holocaust never happened, you'll have the knowledge and the tools to be able to respond accordingly. With that, I'd like to pass over the Zoom microphone to our educator testimonial today. Lisa Levitan is an award-winning educator based in Ottawa. Lisa just recently organized Rise Up Ottawa a few weeks back, which was an incredible program that brought together almost 1,000 members of the Jewish community to learn about what anti-Semitism in schools looks like, sounds like, and feels like in 2022. This fantastic global event gave Jewish students the chance to be heard, seen, and validated. Lisa has dedicated her life to ensuring that never again is more than just words. So Lisa, thanks so much for being here, and the Zoom microphone is yours.
Thanks, Avi. Thanks so much. And thank you, Chess, for allowing this space to exist. Very, very important. So yes, my name is Lisa Levitan, and I've been a teacher here in Ottawa for almost 20 years. I'm Jewish. I probably spent more time at the OCDSB than anyone else because I was a French immersion student myself at Knoxdale, Greenbank, and SRB. And now as an adult, I'm well known as to regularly be the last teacher to leave the school building. So if I get out before the custodians make me leave at 11 p.m., that's a really good day. And it's because I've known that I've wanted to be a teacher my entire life. It was actually my grade 1 teacher, Madame de Charette, who inspired me to do what I love. And I don't take for granted the fact that I am so lucky to live my passion and inspire and motivate these young minds of tomorrow every single day. I feel incredibly honored and lucky to have this platform. That being said, what I've witnessed and experienced since May 2021 has been like nothing I've ever seen. I've spoken up against hate for all marginalized groups my entire life, always standing up for anyone being discriminated against. But this is different because this time no one is listening and no one is taking action. And that makes it incredibly terrifying and very personal. While anti-Semitism is omnipresent, over the past year, Jewish students, teachers, and families have experienced an unprecedented increase of hate. The fact that it's happening in our schools cannot be ignored. Jewish children as young as 4 years old are being harassed, gaslit, threatened, and attacked simply for being Jewish. Children and teachers are hiding their Jewish identity while being told that we are lucky, us, the Jewish people representing less than 2% of Canada's population, us, the lucky ones who lost over 6 million in the Holocaust, while survivors were relentlessly tortured like animals, worse than animals, in fact. Us, the ones who are consistently breaking records for experiencing the most hate crimes of any religious groups. We are the lucky ones. No. If in fact schools are abiding by the law and following the human rights code, being that hate has no place in education, how has anti-Semitism become so normalized in schools in such a short period of time to the point where the word anti-Semitism has lost its meaning? And although those in positions of power, such as senior staff and trustees, are hearing us, because I'm at those meetings, they're listening to the students and the parents and the community members and the educators. They are hearing us, they're not listening to us. Because if they were listening, they would know that what they've allowed to occur under their watch requires immediate action, rather than exhausting and extremely offensive broken promises of beginning their learning journey about the oldest form of hate and discrimination. As a Jewish teacher in a public school board who has been on the front lines receiving daily anti-Semitic reports and attacks for over a year, trust me when I say that this is not free speech. This is hate speech with one commonality. Everyone feels that they are alone and no one knows what to do. When finally mustering up the courage to speak up, we are ignored, dismissed, and we are told what is and is not anti-Semitic by people who do not identify as Jewish. Can you imagine any other race being told what is and is not harmful to their identity? There would be mass protests in the streets all around the world. Any other race. So where is our support? When protests filled with hate and lies become the new fad for students who, for the most part, have no idea what they're saying, and they don't even understand what the issue is and what they're trying to express, and yet we're allowing it to happen, we have a big problem in the field of education. The intergenerational trauma that Abby spoke about in terms of the Holocaust is very real. And it was just stated last week that Jews are right now experiencing the most hate ever. That is exactly what happened before the Holocaust. This is a parallel to what happened before the Holocaust. This is 2022. This should not be happening. We are repeating the past, and it's enough. We must not hide. We must not run away. We must not combat hate with hate. We must come together and rise up, because never again is right now. Thank you very much.
Lisa, thank you so much. We can feel the passion and the emotion through Zoom. It's like we're all holding hands here together. And thank you for not being silent, and thank you for speaking up and the courage that you've shown. Guys, it's very important to know that Lisa is a teacher in Ottawa. So if you want to get in touch with Lisa and have a conversation with her and learn from Lisa, she's there. She's on the ground. Take advantage of that opportunity. I'm sure Lisa would be happy to speak with anybody. So Lisa, thank you again so much for sharing your words. With that, I want to jump back into another video that is directly relevant to everything that Lisa just mentioned, right? There's so much accusation that anti-Semitism is caused because of Israel. Anti-Semitism is caused by the Jews themselves. So I'd like to jump into our last video, our second video of the day. This video is called, "Do Jews and Israel Cause Anti-Semitism?" So let's find out. Take it away.
Do Jewish people cause anti-Semitism? This probably seems like an offensive question, and sure sounds like an example of blaming the victim. But a shockingly large number of people believe that Jews cause themselves to be hated, and it's one of the reasons why anti-Semitism has endured for so many centuries. A recent CNN survey found that nearly 1 in 5 Europeans believe that anti-Semitism in their countries was a response to the everyday behavior of Jewish people. An even more commonly expressed version of this belief is the claim that Israel causes anti-Semitism. And that's just the ones who admitted it to a pollster. So back to the question, do Jews or the Jewish state cause anti-Semitism? If we're going to uproot anti-Jewish prejudice, it's crucial to understand exactly why the claim is so egregiously wrong, logically, historically, and morally. Unfortunately, the idea that Jews are responsible for their own persecution is not some fringe idea. Take Swedish Public Radio, the country's equivalent of NPR. In early 2015, host Helena Groll interviewed Isaac Bachman, Israel's ambassador to Sweden, in the wake of 2 deadly anti-Semitic attacks in Europe. But Groll didn't ask the Israeli envoy what non-Jews could do to stop this virulent anti-Semitism. Instead, she asked,
do the Jews themselves have any responsibility in the growing anti-Semitism that we see now?
Bachman, unsurprisingly, was shocked.
Well, I reject the question altogether. The question of how a woman contributes for the fact of being raped is irrelevant altogether. I don't think that there is any provocation the Jews are doing. They just exist.
As we noted in an earlier video, the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights has found that 60% of Swedish Jews fear to publicly identify as Jewish. That Groll, a respected member of the media, felt comfortable blaming Jews for their own abuse helps explain why. Groll didn't stop digging, however. She went on.
But a lot of people would look at the Middle East today and say there is conflicts that we know between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And a lot of people might say we see the Gaza war, we see things that have been happening, that the Israelis and the Jews in Israel have a responsibility to reactions that are coming.
After outrage on social media over this bizarre exchange, the public radio station apologized for the interview and purged it from their online archives. But erasing the evidence of bigotry is not the same as confronting and debunking it. In her interview, Groll said that a lot of people think as she does. So why are these people mistaken? Simply put, the idea that Jews or Israel cause anti-Semitism is wrong for 3 interrelated reasons: logic, history, and morality. Logic. Take the notion, sometimes presented by well-meaning people, that Jews came to be despised as miserly and greedy because they were forbidden from owning land or holding most occupations, and so were compelled to become moneylenders in the Middle Ages. The argument is that Jews came to be associated with money and thus hated for their money. Jewish behavior caused Jew hatred. It's a very convenient tale to explain anti-Semitism, but it doesn't actually make sense. After all, why were Jews restricted from so many professions and not permitted to own land? The underlying anti-Semitism predated the conduct that allegedly caused it. Supposed Jewish miserliness was an excuse for anti-Semitism, not the explanation. This underscores a fundamental point. Like most groups subjected to bigotry, Jews are hated not because of what they do, but because of who they are. A small minority that is different from the majority. This intolerant dynamic stays the same, while the justifications for it change over time. That's why if you get rid of one rationale for anti-Semitism, a new one just takes its place. And these explanations never stand up to scrutiny. History. Take the claim that the modern state of Israel, the home of half the world's Jews, causes anti-Semitism. Studies and headlines show that when the Jewish state engages in military action, anti-Semitic acts tend to spike in parts of Europe. But if we reflect on the last 1,000 years of history, we see that once again, this is not the cause of the anti-Semitism, it's the cover story for it. From the Crusades, to the Spanish Inquisition, to the Holocaust, anti-Semitism plagued Europe and beyond long before Israel was established in 1948. The Jewish state couldn't provoke any of these anti-Jewish assaults. It didn't exist. In fact, Europe's utter inability to protect its Jews was a major reason why many of them fled to found their own state. The effort to pin Jew hatred on the Jewish state, then, is an attempt to invert cause and effect in order to evade historical responsibility. But ascribing anti-Semitism to Jews or Israel is not just wrong logically and historically. It's also wrong morally. We don't consider it acceptable or understandable to blame the victims of bigotry in any other context, or at least we shouldn't. It's never okay to attack random Jews over the actions of completely different Jews thousands of miles away in the Middle East. Just like it's never okay to attack random Muslims over the actions of Muslim groups or countries thousands of miles away in the Middle East. It's as absurd and offensive as assailing a French person in New York over the actions of French people in Paris. This sort of racist thinking isn't the cause of anti-Semitism, it's the essence of anti-Semitism. That people still blame Jews or Israel for anti-Semitism in polite company, just as today many still blame black people for racism, or women's dress for rape, shows just how embedded anti-Jewish assumptions still are, even in educated enclaves. But while anti-Semites may cite Jewish actions to justify their prejudice, we know better, and we don't have to fall for it. Jews don't cause anti-Semitism. Anti-Semites do.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that video touches on a lot of the topics that we've discussed so far today. I just want to point out that if any of you are looking to either educate yourself or use videos like this with your students or with your family and friends, we have 6 videos about anti-Semitism. Why is anti-Semitism still around? Whose fault is it? Is criticizing Israel anti-Semitic? Right? Do Jews in Israel cause anti-Semitism? Right? And others as well. All you need to do if you want to use these videos, you can check them out on YouTube. You search Unpacked Anti-Semitism and you will find it. So one of the themes that came up over and over again in that video is Israel, right? Is anti-Semitism caused by Israel? Is anti-Semitism caused by Jews, right? And this has come up many, many times during this session already. And let's get into this. Let's clarify things, right? This has been said already today, but it's okay to hear it again. Israel as a country can and should be receptive to fair and legitimate criticism, whether the criticism is from its own citizens or from members of the larger global community. However, and this is what's important here, because we're trying to learn what is hatred, what is offensive, what is hurtful, what is creating unsafe spaces for our students. However, all too often, condemnation of Israel crosses the line from valid criticism into denigration that can be considered anti-Semitic. So I want to give you 3 practical tools to determine when we're speaking on this topic, when criticism of Israel, right, which is the only Jewish state in the world, on the other side of the world, not for me, I'm sitting in it right now, but I want to give you 3 practical tools to determine that will help you figure out when criticism of Israel, which as we've explained and we'll say over and over again is totally legitimate, turns into something much darker. So we call this the 3 Ds test, and Dr. Friedhoff mentioned this earlier in his testimonial. three Ds that we want to focus on here. And if you think about this in the context of any country, it also makes sense, right? So number one, demonization. When Israel and its leaders are made to seem completely evil, when Israel's actions are blown out of all sensible proportion, when Israel and Israelis are equated with Nazi Germany and Nazis, when Israel is seen as the sole cause for the situation in the Middle East, this is considered anti-Semitism, not legitimate criticism of Israel. Right? Double standards. This is something that Dina mentioned at the beginning. When criticism of Israel is applied selectively and in a grossly unfair manner, and Israel is singled out, when clearly immoral behavior of other nation states is ignored, this is considered anti-Semitism. Delegitimization, right? When Israel's fundamental right to exist is denied alone among all peoples of the world. So I'm going to show you some actual real-life examples that have created a lot of tension and have created a lot of fear amongst Jewish students, parents, educators, and the community that have taken place in Ottawa. And I just want to give some nuance and explain things here. So here's a picture. This example comes from a multicultural event at an Ottawa school this past year. And if you pay attention to the picture, it includes a map of Israel, but Israel has been entirely replaced in this map as if it doesn't exist with Palestine, right? This is an example of delegitimization, as it infers that Israel doesn't exist, which it of course does, and that it shouldn't exist. Israel is a democratic country, and many would view this as hate speech, in which Israel is simply wiped off the map. By all means, all of our students should be proud of their respective identities, but it doesn't need to be at the expense of others. Right? Here's another example that Lisa just mentioned. This was at an event in Ottawa school this past year, in which the sign on the right reads "From the river to the sea," which refers to the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, which are the two bodies of water that Israel exists between, its eastern and western borders. It's important to understand how this is understood by many Jews, that Israel should not exist within its borders at all. Right? The sign doesn't call for dialogue, for progress, for negotiations, for peace, but instead it entirely removes Israel off the map, as is indicated in the image right here. In fact, this motto has been used to incite violence against the Jewish community in Israel and outside of it. We need to be aware when activism crosses into hate speech, right? Based on the Jewish generational trauma that I described earlier, imagine what it feels like when somebody uses language that can be inferred as calling for the erasing or destruction of the one country on the planet that was created, amongst some other reasons, as a refuge for Jewish people to keep them safe. Right? It's a terrifying feeling for many Jews and crosses the line from criticism of a country into something much darker. So as I mentioned earlier, and I want to make this really clear once again, if anybody wants to criticize the state of Israel and their policies, by all means do so, as we as Canadians should criticize Canada. That's what democracies and people living in democracies do. Right? Members of Israel's parliament, the Knesset, do this every day from across the religious and political spectrum, right-wing and left-wing, Jewish and Arab. Okay, so ultimately here, right, the focus here is how do we create safe spaces? We need to think about our Jewish students, where they're coming from, and try to avoid this hate speech. So with that, I know a really difficult topic here is when these conversations do come up in class, when people want to speak about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, when they want to bring in the news into the classroom. And we as educators, that's okay, right? We are there to help facilitate that. As you can imagine, a lot of educators around the world are nervous to do this because it's such a triggering topic for so many of our students, right? Whether they're Jewish or Israeli or Palestinian, right? Or in some other way related or passionate about this conflict, it is a dicey topic. It is a controversial topic. It's a tough one. But I want to give you 6 key ways to facilitate conversation about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the classroom, right? So it's very important here that we understand that, yes, we can and should have difficult conversations, but let's do them in educational ways that make our students feel safe. Starting with number 1, let's present the implications about how the Palestinians and Israelis see the current situation. So let's try to teach politics, listen carefully here, let's try to teach politics without being political, right? How do right-wing Israelis see things? How do left-wing Israelis see things? How do different Palestinian groups see things? Because as we all know, no one group shares all the same views, right? Understanding how different groups see the situation helps our students understand the situation, helps them understand the complexity and nuance, right? Number two, let's welcome a range of perspectives into the conversation, right? We need to create a healthy space for dialogue in our classrooms, right? Kids, when respected, will continue to reach out to you. They'll continue to feel safe in class and be able to share their perspectives, because if you don't give them a chance to share their perspectives and their viewpoints, then they're going to do it somewhere else, right? So let's welcome a range of perspectives into the conversation, right? That, of course, are not hate speech. Although many of our students may have a clear answer about who is right and who is wrong, there may also be various perspectives in the room. So let's make sure all of our students feel comfortable asking questions and that we explore the more difficult terms with them, right? Let's resist the temptation to prove that you're right. And instead, let's lead with inquiry rather than trying to prove a point. Number three, and this one's important, let's encourage our students to use social media responsibly. Okay, a couple numbers for you. This is important for us all to understand. I'm sure many of us are addicted to our phones too, but according to a 2021 study on teens, more than half of teens now get their news from social media, and teens spend up to 9 hours, yes, 9 hours on their phones each day for entertainment purposes only. And that number might even be higher, right? That's just what was reported. So let's remember that too often the world of social media, as we all know, is incredibly polarized. It often promotes, binary thinking in which things are black and white, right and wrong, pro this or anti that. But we know that that's not what the real world is like. We need to give our students a few key messages, right? Let's not get into fights on social media if we don't know the person or if you don't know the facts of the story, right? Instead of regurgitating talking points, let's instead learn history, let's learn the background, let's learn the story. And then, if we'd like to, we can jump in and have constructive conversations, as difficult as it may be, right? This issue is too complicated to be reduced to quick posts and opinions. So people of all ages need to consider that there's more to a situation than meets the eye, right? It's important to bring this conversation to your students. Ask your students in a discussion what approaches they think works best when it comes to social media and all of these controversial issues, right? Another piece here, number 4, let's underscore that the Israelis and Palestinians are real people, not sports teams to root for, right? It's not good versus evil, right? These are real people that are diverse, that are nuanced, that are complex, that have differing points of view. And there's a conflict, and these people are trying to solve it, although it may seem slow, although things may be crazier at different times. These are two peoples that are very diverse and are working to solve these issues slowly but surely. Number 5, let's help our students be more critical consumers of information. And we need to ask ourselves, are we educators or are we activists, right? One thing we need to do is distinguish this exact question. We need to ask ourselves, and our students need to ask when they're looking at information, is your source of information an observer whose job it is to explain things, or an activist with a political plan, right? The goal of activist organizations isn't meant primarily to explain what's going on, but to induce you to support a particular position, right? Contradictory information in those cases isn't included. So it's our job as educators not to tell our students what to think, but we need to give them the tools of how to think. And finally, when we're talking about an issue like this one, let's shift the focus from who started it to how did we get here, right? Let's learn history. History matters, context matters, okay? There's so much to unpack that we've heard from our student testimonial, parent testimonial, educator testimonial. We've broken down anti-Semitism, given examples of it, discussed how to navigate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the classroom, and now is the opportunity for you guys to unpack it together. So we're gonna take the next 12 minutes, we're gonna go into breakout rooms as an opportunity to reflect. We believe that learning without reflection never actually happened. So this is an opportunity to share ideas, share experiences, reflect on what you've learned so far, and to connect with each other on this important topic. So the way this is going to work is in a moment, you'll be added to various breakout rooms. If you are a teacher, you'll be added to a breakout room with fellow teachers. If you're not a teacher, you'll be added to another breakout room to continue the conversation there. And here are some of the questions that are going to be shared in a moment in the breakout rooms. Because of time, I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but you can read them really briefly. They'll be added into the chat and broadcasted to the various breakout rooms. And what I would recommend is with the time you have, the short time you have, maybe each of you can choose a question that you'd like to answer, and you can share your answer to that question within your group. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and it is time to go into breakout rooms. We will spend 12 minutes there, and we will meet back here. Okay, I believe we are back in action. I think everybody is back to the main room. I hope you all had really meaningful conversations. And remember, this is the beginning of the conversation. So if you met a new educator, maybe exchange information and continue that conversation with them. Of course, you can reach out to the organizers of this webinar and continue this conversation. We really wanted to give you the opportunity to share with each other, reflect, and learn from each other, and to take advantage of this opportunity. So thank you so much for taking advantage of that. With that, I'd like to introduce our final testimonial of the day. We've heard from a student, we've heard from a parent, we've heard from an educator. We now have the privilege of hearing from an administrator. So Alex Baloney, who's the principal of Holy Trinity Catholic High School. She's been an educator for 37 years, working as a math teacher and department head for 20 years in the OCDSB prior to becoming an administrator in 2006. Currently, she's the principal of Holy Trinity Catholic High School, and this is her second year at the school. Prior to that, she was the principal of Sacred Heart High School and St. Pius X High School, and the vice principal of St. Paul High School and St. Mark High School. Serving in these different school communities has provided her with a unique perspective regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion. And with that, I want to pass over the Zoom microphone to Alex Baloney. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Avi, and I am so sorry I interrupted you. I forgot that my mic was already on. I'd like to welcome, I'd like to thank everyone, Chess in particular, and Nina, for inviting me to speak tonight. My hope is to share with you our experience in dealing with an incident of anti-Semitism that occurred in our school from the perspective of the administration team. As we all know, there has been rising incidents of anti-Semitism across school boards, and our school is not exempt. Unfortunately, we recently dealt with a situation where symbols of anti-Semitism were used by students in 2 of our classrooms. This caused serious concerns amongst our staff, who immediately reported it to the administration. The vice principal and I took immediate action to address the situation in a firm, clear, and compassionate way. We used a multi-pronged approach to protect the safety of our students, to assign the proper consequences, and to give staff, students, and families the opportunity to learn, reflect, and make a positive change as a result. For me and my team, it was very important to send a clear message that any acts of hatred and discrimination would be condemned and be seriously addressed. As equally important, we wanted to provide students involved and their families with the opportunity to engage in a transformative learning process that would promote positive actions towards a more inclusive, tolerant, and kinder school community. Lastly, we intended to build capacity among our staff to support their teaching practices. This is why we used a very targeted approach with the students directly involved, including consequences and learning opportunities, and expanded our reach to the classroom by delivering a lesson to the 2 classes where the incident had occurred. This lesson was designed to learn about the Holocaust, combat anti-Semitism, prejudice, and racism, and to promote respect for diversity and human rights. This lesson was generously shared by Chess, a center that we were so blessed to connect with. The lesson was delivered by both the classroom teacher and the vice principal to offer students both perspectives. I'd like to thank our vice principal here tonight with me, Mrs. Canahan, and the staff, also one of them here with me tonight, for adapting the lesson to the appropriate grade level and for delivering it with such passion and dedication. By being this intentional, we hope that our students will become more aware of the seriousness of their actions, whether intentional or not, and the detrimental impact that it had on our school community. We hope that through learning and reflecting, they will be able to recognize acts of injustice and use their best judgment to take a stand. Our long-term plan is to deliver this lesson to other classes and to develop new opportunities for teaching and learning in our school. As I said earlier, we also intended to build capacity among our staff, so we extended an invitation to the staff to participate in this workshop. I am so pleased to see many of my colleagues here tonight, including one of our very own French teacher, Madame Bella Lukowicz, who was very instrumental in this process. Thank you very much. They are all very invested in our quest to dismantle hatred and discrimination in our school. Our next step is to plan a school-wide initiative to ensure our message goes out loud and wide so that we can continue to protect and respect the dignity of everyone. In addition, I continue to work with the school board, both to receive and to give support when needed. Our school has been actively involved in various initiatives to combat racism and discrimination, and we have taken the training and the experiences from the past to apply to this new context. My hope is to continue our work, our development, and our efforts to offer our school community the best possible place for learning, free from hatred and discrimination. Like we told our students this morning during the lesson, it is never okay to perpetuate prejudice and intolerance, nor it is okay to ignore words, behavior, and actions to cause harm to others. The work may never be done, but our intention to never stop doing the work will never waver. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to share our journey with you.
Alex, thank you so much for sharing what's going on in your school. And it's inspiring, I think, for all of us to see your values and principles and how you bring that across to your staff and your students. So we thank you for all the amazing work that you do. And with that, everybody, we're almost near the ending here. What I'd like to do is, this is the opportunity for questions, okay? So we're gonna post again in the chat right now the instructions of how to send in a question. Again, we've organized this through menti.com. I'm sure most of us know what menti.com is because we're all teachers here. If you're not familiar with it, it's a really great tool that you can use with your students for brainstorming, for voting on different topics, for answering questions. It's a great engaging tool to use. Again, it's in the chat, but I will also share my screen and show you this. All you need to do is go to menti.com and use the code 86966769. And we're all teachers here. We all know about wait time. So I'm going to give you a minute right now to send in questions. And then we'll have time to answer a few of those questions. Then we'll speak about the resources that you can use, and we'll wrap things up for the day. So let's take this minute. Think of any question you have, any burning question that you'd love to be answered. Please send it in, whether it's about anti-Semitism or Jewish identity, or about the community, any of the above, any of the topics that we've discussed today. Please send in those questions. And in about 30 seconds, we will start answering them. Here's the wait time begins now. Okay, so I'm going to begin by answering the questions as they come in. The first question, a number of you asked about the videos that we presented. Are they available for school use? How can they be shared? Yes, of course they're available. In a moment, I will show you a slide with a website where you can find all of those videos. But also, as you can see here, I work at Unpacked for Educators. We have a YouTube channel, and on our YouTube channel that's called Unpacked, you can find all of our videos about anti-Semitism, about Jewish history, about the Jewish people, about Israel, about geopolitics, right? As I mentioned, in a really complex and nuanced way that really pushes empathy and understanding, that are done in a way that can be used in a variety of contexts. So I really encourage you to check out Unpacked on YouTube, where you can find all of those videos. All of those videos are there. Yes, the recording will be shared with everybody, absolutely. Okay, here's a question. How do we combat all of the false hate being taught to kids by teachers at the OCDSB? So yeah, it's a heavy-hitting question, and not being part of the community in OCDSB, I can't speak to details there, but I think each of us as educators, and knowing, you know, the politics of each of our individual schools, number one, let's take it upon ourselves as educators to make sure that starting in our classrooms, we're creating safe spaces. We're taking the lessons that we've learned in today's session about how to identify anti-Semitism, how to respond to anti-Semitism, how to have an educational conversation about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict without it leading into hate speech, right? Let's use those tools and let's bring those to our classes. Let's bring those to our colleagues, those who aren't here today, right? If we have meetings with our administrators, let's bring this to our administrators. Let's share the recording with our administrators, because what we're speaking about today is simple, right? Whether we were talking about Jewish students or any other group of students, we're speaking about creating inclusive and safe environments for all of our students. And when it comes to Jewish students, right, these are the examples that we need to understand as educators of how anti-Semitism manifests itself in many cases and how we need to protect those students. So these are basic things that we need to share with our students, with our colleagues, with our administrators, and that's something that I think we all need to know. Okay, another good question here. Again, I don't know that I'm the right person to respond to this. Maybe later on in the follow-up email that you'll all receive, we'll get more information about this, but what teacher education will be conducted to prepare teachers for the grade 6 Holocaust curriculum and for Jewish Heritage Month to handle anti-Semitic backlash? So that's a good question. I'm not sure what's coming from, you know, the school board. I see there's it's taken care of. So again, in a moment, I'll speak about from the perspective of this webinar, resources that you can take advantage of, that you can use. And the last question that I'm going to address right now, actually, there were 3 or 4 questions asking about resources. So let me now speak about that exactly, about resources. And again, those of you, if I didn't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to the organizers of this session, to me directly. Happy to continue this conversation, and so happy that people are feeling vulnerable to ask these questions and to really accept this conversation in a meaningful way. So let's talk resources, right? We've spoken about all of these various issues, and a webinar for 90 minutes, for 100 minutes is helpful, but what practical resources, sources, videos, links, texts can you use in your classrooms to bring this all to life? So I'd like to give a few examples. Number one, I mentioned this before, Unpacked for Educators. So we are a Jewish educational media company that I mentioned at the beginning. We have videos, we have articles, we have podcasts. We also have social media content unpacking all of these issues. Again, this will be shared in a follow-up email tomorrow, the link to that website. So definitely check that out. Also, very exciting, a brand new program, Unlearn Anti-Semitism, funded by Ontario's Ministry of Education and developed in partnership with the Toronto Holocaust Museum and Facing History and Ourselves Canada. Unlearn Anti-Semitism provides educators and parents educational materials to help them frame constructive, courageous conversations centered on lived experiences of those facing anti-Semitism and online hate. So that is a brand new curriculum that was just released. and it is fantastic. I looked through it myself the other day. That will be sent to you, so definitely check that out. Also, the Azrieli Foundation, we will send you fantastic sources in the follow-up email, and of course, the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, who have a variety of incredible resources that you can take advantage of in your classes. So all of the links to these useful resources will be shared with you in a follow-up email that Chess will send you. And I really, really encourage each of you to take the time to go through these links, watch the videos, read the articles, go through the sources, read through the curriculum, and try to find pieces that are useful to you, either for your own learning or that you could use in the classroom. So again, feel free to reach out to any of the organizers for more information about those. And before we say goodbye, I wanted to mention that we will be sharing a short survey exit ticket in, I believe, either in the chat or in an email after this call. And it's very important. Number one, we're all educators. We want to check for understanding. We want to assess, right, whenever we have the opportunity. So we want to do the same. We want to see what questions do you still have? What did you learn from the session? So please take the 2 minutes to respond to that. And that would be really helpful for that. With that, I would love to really thank the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, especially Mina Cohen and Minda Chaikin, for taking the initiative and showing leadership and organizing this vitally important seminar, which will hopefully help us all create safer spaces for our students and give us all the tools that we need, or at least the beginning to give us some of the tools we need to be more nuanced, empathetic, and conscientious educators, as we're part of the solution here. We don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. So also thank you to all of our testimonials today, right? Dina, Yoni, Alex, and of course, Lisa, for your incredible testimonials. They were so worthwhile for all of us to hear. So thanks for joining us today. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Mina Cohen, the chair of the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, to share a few final words.
Thank you. Thank you, Avi. Thank you for guiding us through this incredible evening. I want to start with a heartfelt thank you to the sponsors who made this event possible and all the participants who joined us tonight. This evening's program was definitely educational for all of us. Thank you to Dina, Dr. Friedhoff, Lisa Levitan, and Alex Belloni for your important contribution. And thank you, Avi, for this educational opportunity, and to all the audience that joined us, teachers and non-teachers. I want to stress that we continue to work with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board and are pleased to share that we are starting to see positive changes. We recognize the complexity and the learning curve that combating anti-Semitism represents to all involved, and we strongly urge robust training to all levels of educators and administrators at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. On behalf of Chess, one additional thing that I would like to say before we conclude the evening, and that is that November 29 is Giving Tuesday. Please consider making a difference by supporting Chess' effort to educate against hate. Chess is a volunteer-based organization, and all your donations to Chess are tax deductible and contribute directly to the development and promotion of Holocaust education. Thank you all for being here, and good night.